The Haunting of Hollow Ridge. Episode 8, The Final Confrontation. The sinister laugh echoed through the chamber, sending chills down Nina's spine. She glanced around, her heart racing. The air was thick with tension, the oppressive silence broken only by that unnerving sound. Daniel, Jack, Tom, and Grace were all still recovering, their breaths coming in ragged gasps after their ordeal. Nina slowly stood up, her eyes scanning the room. In the far corner, where the shadows clung thickest to the walls, something began to move. A figure emerged, its form barely distinguishable from the surrounding darkness. As it stepped closer, the shadows parted, revealing a tall man dressed in tattered, old-fashioned clothing. His eyes gleamed with malevolence, and a twisted grin spread across his face. "Welcome," he said, his voice smooth and cold. "I see you found your way to my sanctuary." Nina's heart pounded in her chest as she instinctively stepped back, her body tensing. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking, despite her attempt to sound strong. The man's smile widened. "I am the master of this house. I am the one who built it, and the one who feeds on the fear of those foolish enough to enter. You've done well to make it this far, but you will not leave here alive." Daniel stepped forward, his face pale but determined. "We're not afraid of you." The man chuckled softly. "Oh, but you are. You're all filled with fear. I can taste it, you've merely learned to hide it better." His eyes flicked to Grace, who was struggling to sit up, still weak from the house's grasp. "And you, my dear? You were the sweetest of all. So much fear, so much regret." Grace's eyes widened in terror, but Nina quickly placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "Don't listen to him, Grace. We're getting out of here." The man took another step forward, and the temperature in the room plummeted. The walls began to pulse again as if the house itself was awakening from a deep slumber, reacting to its master's presence. The ground beneath them trembled, cracks forming in the stone floor. "You think you've won by destroying my shadows?" the man asked, his voice low and dangerous. "The house is alive. It is me, and I am it. You cannot destroy what I am." Nina clenched her fists. "We'll see about that." With a sudden roar, the man raised his arms, and the shadows around them surged to life, swirling like a storm. The room was consumed by darkness once more, but this time, the shadows seemed more solid, more menacing. They twisted and coiled, taking on grotesque, monstrous forms, ready to strike. "We can't fight this thing," Jack muttered, his voice barely audible over the howling wind that filled the chamber. "We have to try," Nina shouted. "We've come this far." Tom stepped forward, determination burning in his eyes. "He's linked to the house. If we take him down, maybe the house goes with him." Daniel nodded, gripping a broken piece of stone in his hand like a weapon. "It's our only shot." The man sneered, his eyes gleaming in the dark. "You will fail, just like all the others." But Nina wasn't about to back down. She locked eyes with the twisted figure before her, her mind racing. The symbols on the walls, the connection between the man and the house, it all pointed to one thing. The house was a manifestation of his power, but power could be broken. "Daniel, Jack, Tom, distract him," Nina shouted. "I think I know how to stop him." Without hesitation, the boys charged at the figure, their movements swift and coordinated. The shadows lashed out at them, but they ducked and dodged, using whatever they could find to hold the creature at bay. Nina sprinted toward the altar where Grace had been lying. There, at the base of the stone, she saw it, an inscription carved into the surface, similar to the symbols on the walls. It was faint, but she could feel the energy radiating from it. This was the source of his power, the key to everything. She knelt down, her fingers tracing the symbols. "There has to be a way to break this," she muttered, her heart pounding in her chest. Come on, come on." Suddenly, the man's voice boomed through the chamber. "What are you doing?" Nina looked up to see him glaring at her, his face twisted in fury. The shadows around him surged forward, knocking Tom and Daniel to the ground. Jack was thrown against the wall with a sickening thud, crumpling to the floor. "Nina, Grace screamed, her voice filled with terror. Nina's heart raced as she scrambled to her feet. The man was coming for her, his eyes blazing with rage. She had only seconds to act. Desperately, she grabbed the nearest stone and raised it above her head, aiming for the center of the inscription. "Stop," the man bellowed, but it was too late. With a mighty swing, Nina brought the stone crashing down onto the altar. The moment it made contact, the entire chamber shook violently, and a blinding light erupted from the symbols. The man let out a horrific scream, his form flickering as the house itself seemed to convulse in agony. The shadows writhed and twisted, losing their shape and dissolving into nothingness. The walls began to crack and crumble, the ceiling above them groaning under the strain. "No," the man shrieked, his voice filled with desperation. "You cannot destroy me. I am eternal." But Nina could feel the power draining from him. The house was collapsing, the grip it had on them loosening with every passing second. She grabbed Grace's hand and pulled her to her feet. "We have to go, now." Daniel and Tom stumbled to their feet, battered but alive. Jack groaned as he pushed himself off the ground, wincing in pain but still able to move. Together, they bolted for the staircase, the walls crumbling around them as they ran. Behind them, the man's screams echoed through the collapsing house. "You will never be free of me," he roared. "I will haunt you forever." But Nina didn't look back. They raced up the spiraling staircase, the ground shaking beneath their feet. The house was coming apart, but they were so close to freedom. The cold air hit them as they burst through the front door, stumbling onto the overgrown lawn outside. Behind them, Hollow Ridge creaked and groaned, its once imposing structure collapsing into itself, the dark windows shattering as the roof caved in. For a moment, they all stood there, breathless and trembling, watching as the house that had tormented them for so long finally crumbled into ruins. Grace let out a soft sob, tears streaming down her face as she collapsed into Nina's arms. "We did it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We actually did it." Nina held her close, her own tears mixing with the dirt and sweat on her face. "Yeah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We did." Daniel, Jack, and Tom stood nearby, watching in stunned silence as the last remnants of the house disappeared into the earth, swallowed by the forest that had once hidden it from the world. For a moment, the air was still, the oppressive weight of the house's presence lifted. It was over. Or so they thought. As they turned to leave, a cold breeze swept through the clearing, carrying with it the faintest of whispers. Nina froze, her heart skipping a beat. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes widening in horror. In the distance, among the ruins of Hollow Ridge, a single, twisted figure stood, watching them with glowing eyes. The nightmare wasn't over. It never would be. End of episode 8.